Welcome back to the podcast on Diplomacy Next. And this is the 49th podcast that we are conducting. And I am being joined by Dr. Alvite. He is an assistant professor at the Symbiosis School of International Studies. Today's topic for the podcast is that we'll be checking in and touching upon India and Israel relations and the current dynamics. And along with that, we'll also be touching upon certain things when it comes to West Asia and Indian foreign policy. First of all, I'd like to welcome him on the podcast.
Thank you, Mehraj. Good evening, and also to all the viewers. Particularly my gratitude to you for having me on board this evening to speak on these two very important subjects. One pertaining to the existing nature or the evolving nature of relations between India and Israel, a very important country from the West Asian region, or you call it the Middle East. And also the trajectory of the Indian foreign policy vis-a-vis the West Asian region. So I'm glad that I could join you here this evening to forward a few of my thoughts pertaining to the subjects.
It's actually our pleasure, sir, to have you on board for this conversation, because since long we have been getting feedback to invite you on the podcast, and finally it has happened out of the tight schedule that you must be having. And thank you again for joining in. And first of all, I would like to touch upon this thing that if we talk about the historical background of the India and Israel relations from 1947 onwards up to 1962, and then from 1962 up to 1990 after the end of the Cold War. Can we pick it up from the post-Cold War period that will help us to connect it to the current dynamics?
Yes. Well, if I may begin with, we have had a very interesting journey, particularly between these two countries, right from 1947 and 1948. Both the countries achieved independence like around the same time, gap of almost a year, because of many prevailing geopolitical reasons, regionally as well as domestically. There was a little bit of a coldness in the relationship. Both the countries were not able to establish full ambassadorial diplomatic relations, and that you also mentioned those very important time frames. But things have started to change sometime from the 70s and the 80s, particularly from the 80s onwards, when the international when the international affairs or the international order was also undergoing a massive change, particularly with the decline of the Cold War. That, of course, had a major impact on India reorienting its policy towards the West Asian region, particularly Israel. And at the same time, the emerging dynamics of the US foreign policy then also had some impact on the ultimate normalization of relations between Israel and India. The fall of the Soviet Union, particularly in the early 90s, 1991, had a major impact or bearing on India's foreign policy. It was around that time we were also looking for certain partnerships to meet some of our requirements for strategic components, technology, or military requirements, because earlier before that, USSR was one of the largest supplier of military equipments to India. And that also because of the prevailing security dynamics in and around the Indian subcontinent. We also looked at establishing relations with Israel also as a gateway to get closer to the United States. By then, the US already had become one of the strongest partners for Israel in all the senses, economic sense or military sense. And at the same time, the emerging nature of the geopolitics or the security scenarios in the West Asian region, particularly the 1990-91 Gulf War crisis or the Gulf War, also had given some sort of a encouragement to India to start looking at a partner or to start looking at a country which is more or less, or which was considered more or less very stable, and that was Israel, because they could see the Arab countries were fighting amongst themselves. And that not only with India, but many other countries in the Asian region also started to look at Israel as a kind of a stable country in the region, and also economically and technologically advancing country of the time. So these are some of the, the regional and the international factors that paved the way towards the normalization of relations in 1992, 29 January to be very precise. We just celebrated 30 years of diplomatic relations between India and Israel. Uh, because of the domestic concerns, as well as the Palestinian question, the relations were not discussed very openly for a very long period of time. But then, if you talk about India-Israel relations at the moment, we have reached that comfort zone, and this has been the pattern for the last almost say 10 to 12 years. That particularly from the early part of 2010s, we have started exhibiting certain comfort in talking openly about the relationship. So in the 90s, the relations were going on, but then it was not discussed very widely, and everybody knew that Israel was supporting arms to India. We were buying arms to India, but those things were hardly covered because it was constantly under the lens of the oppositions. That could be from the political parties, from the people of different faiths who were not approving of India getting closer and closer to the Israelis. So it's a fascinating country to me, or not rather, it's a fascinating bilateral relationship, how it was and how it is right now. Uh, the coming out of the closet. This is the term or the sentence which many use in the last few years. Uh, has enabled both the sides to explore various areas of cooperation. No longer, if you ask me about the current scenario between the two countries, it's no longer restricted to arms trade alone or defense or security cooperation alone, while it remains one of the most important mainstays of the bilateral partnerships on cooperation. We are now expanding to other domains as well. So I think we can continue along the conversation if you would want to ask anything specific about other areas where we are cooperating right
Yeah,
now.
sure, sir. And the important thing is that most of the in the entire strategic community, most of the people talk about this dehyphenation post 2014 and a tectonic shift in the Indian foreign policy and the bilateral relations with Israel, especially. Uh, I have an argument on that, is that India's quest for the strategic autonomy. I mean, if we can correlate the two things, that dehyphenation of ties with Israel post 2014 and India's quest for strategic autonomy. I mean, where do we stand on that? Is it something that actually helped India as a country, an important actor on the global at the global level? Has it helped for India's larger canvas of and the larger territory of its strategic autonomy debate? Where do we stand on that? I
Yeah,
mean,
it's a Miraj, it's a very pragmatic approach that has been taken up by India to see these relationships as a kind of a standalone relationship and not to be dictated by any other second party or third party intervention, particularly third party. When you talk about a bilateral relationship, we mostly talk about third party intervention. India for few years, while India has been considered as a champion of the non-aligned movement, things have changed somewhere in the 80s and 90s, and also in the 2000s, particularly after we signed the nuclear deal with the US. But then when it comes to India's Israel policy, I would say, it's a very pragmatic approach. No longer the relationship is bound by or tied down by any ideological, factors. Uh, in the sense that, it's no longer that we have certain baggages to keep in mind. We are mostly worried. No, we are concerned about. We are more interested. I think that's the right sentence. We are more interested in getting the maximum benefit out of this cooperation. So we don't want any, at the moment, particularly with the current government from 2014. It's a very pragmatic approach. The strategic autonomy that you just talked about, that we don't have to be carved down by any other third-party factor. That in itself has given lots of encouragement and a fervor to the overall growth of the relationship. Many in the past, the West India's relations with the Arab countries, India's relations with Iran, for that matter, used to be closely monitored, and those were some of the factors also that could not lead India to more advanced cooperation with Israel. But I think if you have seen that, I think it's not a rocket science to understand that the kind of the nature of our relationship, the nature of our cooperation, not only with Israel, but you take the example which we will come a little later with the other West Asian countries also. It's pretty pragmatic. It's a very it's a kind of a visible display of, I always argue and mention this in my write-ups and my articles, that it's a visible display of real politics. In international relations parlance, we always talk about the real politic. Your national interest and the strategic interest comes first, and in that you are willing to go to any extent to gain the maximum. So it's a very win-win situation. Otherwise, if our foreign policy is being influenced by any third-party factor, we will not be able to harness the actual potential of what the other side or the other region has to offer to us. So I think we are doing fairly well in this region. One of the success stories of the current political dispensation in New Delhi, from the viewpoint of its foreign policy, is this kind of enhancement of relations which we are currently witnessing with the West Asian countries, let alone Israel. You pick up any of these countries, particularly the Gulf countries. Yes.
And now we come to this important aspect of the bilateral relations, is that the military and security relations have deepened and widened a lot since over the time. And what is the if we can track down certain things so that we understand and the larger audience understands about the trajectory of this military and security relationship between the two countries.
Right. See, the trajectory of the military security cooperation between Israel is fascinating. It's one of the largest arms importer for India, and a good share of arms come to Israel. To India from the industries with the origin in Israel. You can see that flurry of the trade, the frequency of the trade right from the early 90s onwards, mid 90s onwards. There have been numbers of papers that have already been written about the nature of this military security cooperation. What is more fascinating in the current scenario is the changing dynamics of this security cooperation or the defense partnership or cooperation. That's also because in my introductory remarks, I mentioned about the fall of the USSR. Then India was left without much of a supplier for its military requirements. Then after the nuclear test in 1998, if I'm not wrong, I'm a little confused with the dates and a year. The Pokhran test, many of the Western countries imposed arms embargo on us, and that was a time when Israel continued to supply arms to India even during the Kargil War of 1999. That raised the profile of Israel as a credible arms supplier in times of crisis and emergency. Which is very important for a country like India, which is still not self-sufficient in terms of our defense requirements, and also given the kind of a hostile environment we are in on both sides of the frontiers, now added with the maritime security threats. We have seen that in 2008 in Mumbai, So that also has led to more cementing and solidification of the relationship between the two countries. Now, I mentioned about the fascinating part of this trajectory is that earlier we used to be buying only arms and ammunitions or defense technologies being manufactured by Israel. But in the recent times, the Indian government has started to give lots of emphasis on the defense indigenization process. Atmanirbhar Bharat, Make in India project, where we are trying to reverse the order now. Rather than being an arms importing country, we would like to go to that status of an arms exporter. But given the kind of requirements, given the nature or the given the types of the armament industries that we have in the country, we would still need to rely on some of the importers for certain types of weapons, and that's when countries like Israel holds very importance. I also argued in one of my papers published recently in December last year, and also some another paper that I published in Jerusalem in 2020, that no matter what we are, regardless of our importance on the self-indigenization process, countries like Israel will be of an asset to India, because there are certain discussions, and there are already joint collaborative efforts being taken up by defense industries of both the sides, particularly in the realms of missile systems. You have Barak missiles, and there are talks about, there are already plans in states of India to produce certain light machine guns. The UAV is one sector, where there could be certain cooperations between the two countries, particularly between the two industries. So the relationship is now changed from that of a patron-client relationship to that of a joint collaboration. And this is something, and for that matter, Israel would continue to require a huge market like India. It's a big market. Whatever Israel produces within the country are not all consumed by the defense forces or the armed forces. They have a very small market. So while a portion or share of what they produce internally is being consumed by their own armed forces, the bulk of the products are exported. And that's the reason why you would see in every report that comes out annually, particularly by the SIPRI, the Stockholm International Peace Research Institute, about Israel's share in the international arms market, international arms trade. So the trajectory is very fascinating. It's no longer that Israel produces and they sell to us and we buy from them. But now we are exploring more and more areas where we can cooperate. So I mentioned that one way of doing it is we already have existing cooperation in the missile domain. In the long run, I won't be surprised if there are cooperation in the field of unmanned aerial vehicles, because there is a fair degree of requirement within the country. We are doing fairly well in our own productions, but certain amount of cooperation, I think, can be there. It can be also in the realm of technological cooperation, not only in the products.
I mean, largely it was a couple of months back when both the countries celebrated 30 years of their bilateral relations, as you rightly mentioned. And then they came up with the comprehensive roadmap document, where they actually put up a document where they will enhance the relations and explore more areas of bilateral cooperation. That having been said, post 1990s, it was the changing geopolitics of Middle East or West Asia that prompted India to, I mean, there are two factors largely. One was the collapse of the Soviet Union, and the second was the changing dynamics of Middle Eastern geopolitics that actually influenced the Indian foreign policy community to diversify its options for, defense cooperation and other areas with other countries also. That having been said, if we look at it in the current dimension, since lots of things have been happening in the Indo-Pacific region, and the so-called some of the scholars will term it as a dehyphenation of US from the Middle East. Does it impact any which way India's engagement with larger West Asia, or it has enhanced the chances of India getting more connected to the region?
I see I think the entire international relations, particularly in this part of the world, when we talk about international affairs and international politics, Indo-Pacific looms very, very large. That's where the power equations, the great power equations, are being played out. The rivalries are getting very visible in that part of the region. The buildup of bilateral partnerships, trilateral partnerships, quadrilateral partnerships. But when it comes to our relationship with the West Asian countries, I see not much of a connection in that. While our foreign minister in 2019 talked about involving some of the Eastern African and Eastern Persian Gulf countries to be a part of the Indo-Pacific strategy. What we particularly are interested in the current scenario is to build up more partnerships in almost all the possible domains. Okay. Indo-Pacific is a very important strategy for India and also for the other countries from Europe or from North America. But when it comes to West Asia, the relationships are being built up mostly on bilateral basis. And there are certain, because as you mentioned rightly about the changing nature of the geopolitics in West Asia, that also opens up further prospects for building up trilateral cooperation or multilateral quadrilateral cooperation. The example is I2U2 that we have, Israel, India, UAE, and the US, where all these four countries are cooperating very closely by identifying some very important pertinent issues or areas of regional as well as international and also national importance, like food security, energy security, climate change, trade and investment, maritime security. So likewise, India is building up these partnerships with some of the now we can shift to the West Asian part. Apart from Israel, there are other countries with whom India is building up its relationship very, very significantly. Saudi Arabia for one, UAE for one, where the things are, the leaps and bounds. The relationship is going up leaps and bounds between India and UAE. You can also see the nature of the bilateral mutual visits of high-level leaders, high-profile leaders from both the sides very frequently, and turning the relationship to be a comprehensive strategic partnership. So, as a result of this, geopolitical realignment, now you can see in the recent times how the countries in the region are also realigning their relations amongst themselves. That also has given a lot more opportunity or a lot more leverage or leeway to India to build certain partnerships. We already have that going with India, UAE, and Israel in certain energy sector. I mentioned this in one of my papers published in 2021 about the further possibilities of India going into such partnerships with other countries, because energy, particularly the renewable energy, has become an important area, important focus of these countries. Like they are trying to build whatever possible connections they could with like-minded countries, because there is an urgent requirement for many of these countries to go back to the renewable sources of energy. So it is within that framework, within that ambit, India is also looking forward to building up more cooperation with countries like, say, Qatar has shown interest, Bahrain has shown interest, apart from UAE and Israel, and Saudi Arabia also has taken up the Green Initiative from 2021. So we will get to see, as a result of this gradual changes that we are witnessing in the Middle East, we will get to see more establishment of such small partnerships or minilateral, or now you call it plurilateral, partnerships amongst like-minded countries. Let alone Israel, it can be with most of these Gulf countries.
And apart from the military and security cooperation between India and Israel, and you have touched upon West Asian countries that India is having relations, and most of the countries have opted for Indian, cooperation in the region. Apart from that, what are the areas that students and scholars have to look into for the next decade when it comes to India's relations with West Asia and particularly with Israel?
That's a very interesting question, Mehraj. I would like to, I'm sure the viewers already have a good understanding of what we are discussing, because these are the topics that always get attention in the news nowadays. Let's not focus on the military security cooperation. As I mentioned in my introductory remark, that it is undoubtedly one of the most important pillars of the bilateral partnerships between India and Israel. But beyond that, things are moving in a very good direction when it comes to India-Israel agricultural cooperation. And these are for in a country. It's in both the countries are agrarian country. Israel has started that way. We also are an agrarian country, which gives lots and lots of significant importance on agricultural activities. So the partnerships between India and Israel in the agricultural sector is considerable. It's very significant. We have seen the mushrooming of Israeli centers of excellence. I think there are about 30 of them in the country. I remember when I started studying this country in 2007, 8, there were only 2 or 3 centers of excellence. But in the span of almost, say, about 16 years, there are about 30 centers of excellence spanning across various states in the country. So agricultural cooperation is one domain which will continue to flourish. And you can see that you just go to any Twitter handles of the Israeli embassy or ministry, what kind of activities they are undertaking in different parts of the country. Water management is another important domain which already has seen some work being done between the two countries. There is a very close connection. There's a very close working relationship between the water ministries of both the countries. The food security is another domain which is picking up. I would request the viewers or the students who are interested in studying further aspects of India-Israel cooperation to look into these issues. There are already quite a bit of remarks being given by the Israeli diplomats who are in India, talking about the importance of enhancing our cooperation in the food security sector. The other one, of course, apart from the cybersecurity, apart from the science and technological cooperation areas, one important area is the health sector. And this applies to not only Israel, but to almost all the countries, Jordan, Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, Oman, Israel. I cannot remember all the other names. We have already signed many MOUs in the health sector. And the pandemic, the COVID-19 has reinforced the need to strengthen and fast speed the process of cooperation between India and these countries. Not only with Israel, we have seen a number of back and forth discussions going on in the last 2.5 years, ever since the entire international community was hit by pandemic. We have a very robust working relationship with many of these health sectors. There are prospects for further R&D, joint collaborations in research papers, exchange of best fit practices to handle this kind of a non-traditional security threats. We have seen for ourselves how this COVID-19 has affected the lives of almost all of us. So health sector is one where you would see more investments and more joint collaborations, research papers getting exchanged between different laboratories, cooperation between medical institutes, health institutes. We have done some fairly good job in Israel in the involvement of the Indians during the second wave of the pandemic. I've come across too many reports talking about how the Indians also helped the Israelis and the kind of assistance we also got from the Israeli government in times of the COVID crisis. So that is one. The tourism sector and people-to-people connect are other areas, particularly, again, look at some of our biggest stars were in Saudi Arabia. Shah Rukh Khan was there, Salman Khan was there, Amitabh Bachchan was recently in Saudi Arabia. And so are many other actors who went to Israel and many other Gulf countries. So there's also a good amount of prospect, particularly Bollywood if you talk about the soft power, promoting our soft power using cinemas and music and art and culture. There are certain forward movements that have already taken place between the Indian film industry and the Israeli film industry, and also with the other Israeli actors and agencies. With Saudi Arabia and other, the religious pilgrimage and although have played a very important role in bridging these connections. And now with Saudi Yeah, so I think if you look into the existing dynamics, there are quite a few. So you can talk about the security and the core defense as one way, but then just to conclude, it's a very promising relationship that we have. Both the sides have realized the importance of shedding certain ideological inhibitions they had in the past, and they have more to gain by getting into more pragmatic cooperation between the two sides, let alone Israel, but also with the other West Asian countries. So